Just one photo was enough for the past to come rushing back. When she posted her son's picture, the millionaire CEO saw it, and his reaction shocked everyone. "Is this son mine?" Watch this story until the end. You'll be surprised by it. If you enjoy love stories and romance, subscribe to this channel. Leave your comment. We post videos like this every day. Continuing. Helen Davies never imagined that day would change her life forever. As the elevator ascended through the floors of Alistair Construction, one of the largest real estate conglomerates in the United States, she clutched her resignation letter tightly between her fingers. 8 months of daily humiliations under the command of Melinda Ferris, the marketing director, had reached their limit. Graduating with distinction in communications from NYU, Helen had arrived at that company with dreams and ambition. Now, only exhaustion remained, etched in her red eyes and deep dark circles. The mirrored building in the heart of Wall Street, New York City, reflected the morning sun while harboring power games within that Helen was no longer willing to endure. Her life in Southwood, on the southern outskirts, seemed increasingly distant from that world of high heels and calculated smiles. It was her mother, Mrs. Celia, who always repeated that simple folk shouldn't dream too big. Perhaps she was right. The elevator's chime announced the top floor. Helen took a deep breath. Her destination was the 22nd floor, where Melinda's office was located. In a moment of distraction, she had pressed the wrong button. She was about to turn back when a slightly ajar door caught her attention. She knocked lightly, expecting a secretary, but received no answer. She pushed the door open carefully. The view of New York City unfolded in an impressive panorama through the wide windows. With his back to her, a tall man silently observed the city. He wore an impeccably tailored suit that highlighted broad shoulders and an elegant posture. Helen froze as she recognized the profile. It was Robert Alistair, the CEO of the construction company, heir to the empire started by his grandfather in the 1960s. "Can I help you?" His deep voice caught her by surprise. He had turned around and was now staring at her with curiosity, eyebrows slightly arched. "I'm sorry, Mr. Alistair. I got the wrong floor." Helen felt her face flush. She had never met the CEO personally. She had only seen him in general meetings or in business magazines that frequently featured him among the country's most influential entrepreneurs. "Do you work here?" The tone wasn't accusatory but genuinely interested. Robert took a few steps closer, and Helen noticed his eyes were a deep brown, almost amber in the natural light. "Marketing department." "Helen Davies," she answered automatically, feeling small in that spacious room with Italian marble flooring. "Actually, I'm on my way out." Robert noticed the crumpled paper in her hands. "Resignation letter?" he asked, directly. Helen hesitated, but something in his gaze, a mix of weariness and sincerity, broke down her defenses. "Yes. I can't take it anymore. Sit down." He gestured to one of the caramel leather armchairs near the window. It wasn't a request nor an order, something in between. Why? The simple question shattered years of self-control. The words began to pour out unfiltered, like water breaking a dam. Helen recounted the impossible tasks, the unrealistic deadlines, the public praise followed by private humiliations. She told him how her ideas were stolen without credit, how she was called to meetings just to serve coffee, how comments about her neighborhood were whispered as she passed. "Last week, I presented an entire campaign for the Horizon residences. Melinda spent the morning praising my work. In the afternoon, in front of the board, she said the project was mediocre and that she would need to redo it herself. That night, I received an email with the exact same campaign, word for word, signed by her." Robert listened without interruption. His expression subtly changed, a furrowing of his brows, a clenching of his jaw, but he remained silent until she finished. When Helen finally stopped, breathing with difficulty and with unshed tears glistening in her eyes, he stood up and poured water from a crystal carafe. "How long have you worked here?" he asked, handing her the glass. 8 months and 3 weeks. Helen took a sip, grateful for the cold water. "And why did you come all the way to the top floor today? Why didn't you just leave the letter with HR and leave?" The question caught her off guard. "Why? Indeed." "Because Helen took a deep breath. Because I wanted to look into the eyes of the person who humiliated me for months and tell her she didn't break my spirit. That I'm leaving with my head held high. An almost imperceptible smile appeared at the corner of his lips. Courage, scarce around here. Robert extended his hand. May I see your letter? Helen handed over the crumpled paper. He read it in silence, nodding slightly as his eyes scanned the lines. Then, without warning, he tore the letter into small pieces. What are you doing? Helen stood up, indignant. You're not leaving, Robert declared, calm. Not like this, not because of this. With all due respect, Mr. Alistair, that's my decision. And this is my company. He stared at her fixedly. Helen Davies, I need people who don't bend at the first strong wind. I need people who defend their ideas and their work. I need people like you. Before she could respond, the door opened without warning. Melinda Ferris entered, perfectly dressed in a grey pantsuit, her blonde hair impeccably pulled back. Robert, we need to discuss the investor presentation. She stopped when she saw Helen. What is she doing here? The condescending tone made Helen's blood boil, but it was Robert who replied, discussing her future at the company. His voice took on a different tone, colder, more distant. Helen is showing me some interesting ideas for the Horizon campaign. Melinda visibly paled. Those basic ideas, Robert, I've already redone the entire concept. It would be a waste of time. Curious? Robert walked to his desk and opened a laptop. Because I just received 2 emails, one from you with the redone campaign, and one from Helen, dated 3 days ago, with exactly the same content, word for word. The silence that followed was as dense as concrete. Helen felt her heart race. How did he know? How did he have access to her email? There must be some mistake. Melinda forced a smile. Helen probably copied my idea by accessing my files. Or perhaps... Robert closed the laptop with a soft click. You've been shamelessly lying to me, to the board, and to everyone in this company for a long time. The tension was palpable. Helen remained motionless, unable to believe what was happening. As of today, Robert continued, looking directly at Melinda, Helen Davies will be promoted to Special Projects Coordinator, reporting directly to me. And you, Melinda, will have a meeting with HR and Legal tomorrow at 9 a.m. to discuss your professional conduct. Melinda opened her mouth, closed it, and then shot a venomous look at Helen. You have no idea what you've just done, she whispered before leaving, slamming the door shut. Helen was paralyzed. What had happened in the last 10 minutes? Her mind tried to process the sudden turn of events as Robert sat back down, seemingly unperturbed. You didn't have to do that, she finally managed to say. Yes, I did. He observed her with intensity. There's something corroding my company from the inside, Helen, and you just gave me the proof I'd been looking for months. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Melinda was suspended while an internal investigation proceeded in secret. Helen, now with her own office on the 23rd floor, was tasked with auditing all campaigns from the past 2 years, identifying stolen ideas and uncredited work. With each discovery, Melinda's name appeared involved in some manipulation or abuse of power. Robert and Helen began working together daily. Initially, their meetings were formal and focused. He, always reserved, maintained a clear professional distance. But gradually, something began to change. A cup of coffee would appear on her desk every morning. A post-it with observations about her work would be accompanied by a discreet, excellent analysis. Small gestures that did not go unnoticed. To Helen, that man was an enigma. Son of one of New York City's most traditional families, educated at the world's best universities, Robert Alistair had a reputation for being cold and calculating in business. The press called him the Emperor of Wall Street, feared, respected, but rarely loved. Yet, the man she worked with every day showed flashes of a sensitivity that contradicted this image. One afternoon, after a particularly tense board meeting, Robert invited her for coffee on the building's rooftop. The rarely used Sky Garden offered a 360-degree view of New York City. I don't usually bring anyone up here, he confessed, leaning against the railing. The wind lightly tousled his dark hair, humanizing his always impeccable figure. Why? Because here, I don't have to be the CEO. I can just be Robert. He sighed, looking out at the city that stretched to the horizon. Do you have family, Helen? The question caught her by surprise. My mother. She raised me alone after my father left us. I have a younger brother who's finishing his engineering degree, the first person in our family to go to university. Robert smiled, a genuine smile that softened his features. You must be very close. We are. And you? His expression hardened. My parents died in a helicopter accident 5 years ago. I have a sister who lives in Paris and barely speaks to me. Alistair Construction is my family now. There was a profound loneliness in those words that touched Helen. In that moment, she saw beyond the CEO, beyond the powerful man. She saw someone as alone as she felt in the corridors of that company. The conversation flowed naturally after that. He spoke about the pressure of taking over the company after his parents' deaths, about sleepless nights making decisions that would affect thousands of employees. She spoke about growing up in Southwood, about studying at night while working during the day, about her dream of giving her mother a better life. As the sun began to set, painting the New York City sky in shades of orange and purple, Robert moved a little closer. The silence between them carried a new, unexpected intimacy. Thank you, he said simply. For what? For reminding me why I started all of this. Robert looked at her with an intensity that made her heart race. For reminding me that there are real people behind every decision I make. The moment was interrupted by his cell phone. It was the company lawyer, with news about Melinda's case. Robert answered, stepping a few paces away. When he returned, the CEO's mask was back in place. I need to go. We'll continue tomorrow. Helen nodded, trying to ignore the sense of loss she felt as she watched him reassume his public persona. As she watched him walk towards the exit, she realized something had changed on that rooftop. A line had been crossed, though neither of them had the courage to admit it. The next morning, a formal investigation against Melinda was announced. The entire company buzzed with rumors. The most absurd theories circulated through the corridors, from embezzlement to a supposed affair with Robert that had ended badly. Helen, unintentionally at the center of the storm, tried to keep her head down and focus on her work, but it was impossible to ignore the stares. The same colleagues who had barely noticed her existence before now watched her with curiosity and, in some cases, resentment. The boss's new darling, she heard someone whisper as she passed the cafeteria. The following weeks were intense. The audit revealed that the problem was much larger than initially imagined. Melinda had created a network of favoritism and intimidation that extended across several departments. People were promoted or fired based on personal loyalty, not merit. Ideas were systematically stolen. A toxic environment had been cultivated for years under the board's radar. Robert, confronted with the extent of the problem, decided to act firmly. One Friday, he called all employees to the main auditorium. Helen sat in the back row, trying to go unnoticed. Alistair Construction was founded by my grandfather with a simple premise: to build not just structures, but legacies, he began, his firm voice echoing through the silent auditorium. In recent years, we've lost sight of that. We allowed individual power and ambition to supersede the collective good. Robert walked across the stage with measured steps. As of today, that changes. I am implementing a new code of conduct and creating an anonymous whistleblower channel. Every allegation will be investigated. Every abuse will be punished. His eyes met Helen's briefly before he continued. And to lead this transformation, I announced the creation of a corporate ethics committee, which will be coordinated by Helen Davies. A murmur ran through the auditorium. Helen felt her face burn as dozens of eyes turned to her. She had not been consulted about this. She was not prepared. I know it's a radical change, Robert continued, and I know we'll face resistance. But if there's one thing I've learned in recent weeks, it's that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the determination to do what's right despite it. When the meeting ended, Helen remained seated as the others left. She didn't know whether she was furious or flattered. Robert approached, hands in his pockets. You should have consulted me first, she said when they were alone. Would you have accepted? Probably not. That's why I didn't consult you. A smile played at the corner of his lips. You are the only person in this company I fully trust, Helen. The only one who had the courage to speak the truth, even when it cost everything. Helen wanted to argue, wanted to remind him of the abyssal difference between their positions, wanted to point out how that decision exposed her even more. But there was something in the way he looked at her, a mixture of admiration and something deeper, that made the words die in her throat. "Shall we have dinner tonight?" His question came out casually, almost nonchalantly, cited to discuss the committee's details. Helen knew it was more than that. She knew that dinner would definitively cross the line between professional and personal. She knew that, from that moment on, the rumors would cease to be just rumors. "It's not a good idea," she finally replied. "Probably not," Robert agreed, without looking away. "But since when are the best decisions the most prudent ones?" The silence that followed was charged with possibilities. Helen thought of her mother, her brother, the small apartment in Southwood that represented her entire reality until a few months ago. She thought of the social chasm that separated her from that man, the complications that would arise, the judgments she would face. "At 8, she finally replied. "But it's not a date." Robert smiled, that rare smile that completely transformed his face. "Of course not. Just a work meeting." Both knew it was a lie. Both pretended to believe it, at least for now. The restaurant Robert chose was at the top of one of New York City's most exclusive buildings. Few people could get reservations, and even fewer could afford the exorbitant prices. Helen felt immediately out of place as the maitre d' led her through tables, occupied by well-known figures from the city's business and political circles. She had opted for a simple black dress, the most elegant one she owned, but still felt the gazes that assessed and judged her. Robert was already waiting for her. He stood up when he saw her approach, an old-fashioned gesture of chivalry that surprised Helen. In an impeccably tailored dark suit, he seemed to belong to that environment like a work of art in its designated museum. "You look beautiful," he said, pulling out her chair for her to sit. "I feel out of place," Helen corrected, nervously adjusting the napkin on her lap. Robert smiled. "Everyone here is trying to impress someone. The difference is, you don't have to try." The sommelier approached to present the already chosen wine, a French label Helen had never tasted. The conversation initially revolved around work, the new committee, the necessary changes. It was safe, familiar territory. But gradually, as the wine was served and the night progressed, the barriers came down. "Why did you choose marketing?" Robert asked between courses. Helen considered the question for a moment. "I grew up watching my mother work herself to death in family homes that advertised in newspaper classifieds. I always thought that if we could tell our story in a different way, perhaps the opportunities would also be different." "And were they?" "Partially. I got scholarships, internships in my first job, but there are always invisible barriers." She looked at him directly. "People like you rarely make space for people like me." Robert didn't look away. "People like me. Born with a silver spoon, educated in the best schools, heirs to empires." A silence settled. Helen feared she had gone too far, had broken the fragile balance between them. But then Robert did something unexpected. He laughed. A sincere laugh, without a trace of condescension. "Do you always say exactly what you think? I discovered that lying to please others only brought me frustration." "Interesting." He swirled his wineglass slowly. "Do you know what fascinates me most about you, Helen? The complete absence of artifice. In this world I live in, full of fake smiles and hidden agendas, you are like a ray of sunshine after months of rain." The compliment caught her off guard, making her face flush. Robert continued, his voice taking on a more personal tone. "You see me only as a privileged heir, and I don't blame you for that. But let me tell you something few people know." He leaned in slightly. "When my parents died, the company was on the verge of bankruptcy. My father had made disastrous investments, accumulated astronomical debts. The newspapers said I inherited an empire. The truth is, I inherited rubble." Helen watched him with new interest as he continued. "I spent 2 years sleeping in the office, restructuring debts, renegotiating contracts, laying off people who had worked with my family for decades. I sold personal properties, apartments, cars. I mortgaged memories to save my grandfather's legacy. Why? You could have sold everything and still been rich. Robert shook his head. Don't you understand? It wasn't about money. It was about honoring the man who built everything from scratch, the son of Italian immigrants who arrived in the United States with nothing. It was about the 5,000 families who depended on the company to survive. There was a passion in his voice that Helen had never witnessed. For a moment, she saw beyond the impenetrable CEO, beyond the rich and powerful man. She saw someone with principles, with purpose. I guess I judged you too quickly, she admitted, as I judged you when we first met. His eyes met hers. Perhaps we both need to re-examine our prejudices. The rest of the dinner unfolded in a different atmosphere, lighter and at the same time more intense. They talked about books, movies, childhood memories. They discovered that, despite the abyssal differences in their backgrounds, they shared surprisingly similar values. When they left the restaurant, Robert suggested a walk. It was a warm spring night, and the streets of the Upper East Side were relatively quiet. May I ask a personal question? Helen broke the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Of course. Why is a man like you single? Gossip magazines always show you with international models, socialites, but never in a serious relationship. Robert considered the question for a moment. Relationships require vulnerability. In the world I live in, vulnerability is seen as weakness, and perhaps, he hesitated, perhaps I've never found someone who made me feel it was worth the risk, until now. The question escaped before Helen could contain it. Robert stopped walking and turned to her. They were under the soft glow of an old lamppost, which cast dancing shadows on their faces. Until now, he confirmed, his voice almost a whisper. The world seemed to slow down as he slowly approached. Helen felt her heart beat against her ribs like a caged bird. When his lips touched hers, everything else disappeared. The doubts, the fears, the differences. The kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, but soon deepened, revealing a passion held back for weeks. When they finally separated, both were breathing heavily. Robert kept his hands on her face, as if he feared she might disappear if he let go. This complicates everything, Helen murmured, still stunned. I know. He rested his forehead against hers, but for the first time in years I don't care about complications. That night, Helen returned to her apartment in Southwood as if floating. Her mother, Mrs. Celia, still awake despite the late hour, immediately noticed the change. "What's that look in your eyes, girl?" she asked, furrowing her grey eyebrows. Helen hesitated. How could she explain to her mother, a simple woman who had spent her entire life distrusting the rich, that she had fallen in love with her billionaire boss? How could she make her understand something she didn't even fully comprehend herself? "It's complicated, Mom." Mrs. Celia observed her with eyes that missed nothing. "A rich man, isn't it? Be careful, daughter. People like us and people like them don't mix without pain." The words echoed in Helen's mind as she tried to sleep. Would it be possible to overcome the social chasm that separated them? Or was she heading for disaster, blinded by passion and novelty? The next morning, Helen arrived at the office earlier than usual. She needed to organize her thoughts before inevitably encountering Robert. To her surprise, a bouquet of lilies, her favorite flowers, though she couldn't remember mentioning it, awaited her on her desk. The card simply read, "No regrets." Twice in the message made her smile. Perhaps it was madness, perhaps it was destined for failure, but in that moment, Helen decided she would live that story to the end, whatever it might be. The following weeks were a delicate balance between professionalism and growing passion. At the office, they maintained a respectful distance, interacting only when necessary and always in a strictly professional manner. But at night, away from curious eyes, they allowed themselves to get to know each other in every sense. Robert took her to places she had never imagined seeing: exclusive restaurants, theaters, art exhibitions. Helen, in turn, introduced him to a side of the United States he only glimpsed through the windows of his armored car. Street fairs, community block parties in Southwood, the true flavor of authentic regional cuisine in small family restaurants. On one of those evenings, after a simple dinner at Helen's house, where Robert charmed Mrs. Celia with his unpretentious kindness and his evident love for her daughter, He made an unexpected proposal. Come live with me. Helen almost choked on the coffee she was drinking. What? I'm tired of pretending, tired of secret meetings, of goodbyes at dawn. I want to wake up beside you every day. Her heart raced. Robert, don't you see? If we go public with this, the consequences will be devastating. For me, for you, for the company. Let them talk. It's not that simple. Helen placed the cup on the table with more force than necessary. To you, I'll always be the secretary who seduced the boss to get ahead. To your family and friends, I'll be the poor girl who's a gold digger. Robert held her hands firmly. Since when do you care what others think? The woman I met had enough courage to confront an abusive director and hand her resignation letter directly to the CEO. It's different. This affects my professional reputation, everything I've fought for. Then we'll fight together. He kissed her hands. Please think about it. I'm not asking for an answer now. Helen promised to consider it, but doubts continued to torment her. The deeper the relationship became, the more frightening the possible consequences seemed. The decision was taken out of her hands 2 weeks later, in the worst possible way. Helen was leading an ethics committee meeting when her cell phone vibrated insistently. It was Louise, her assistant, with an urgent message. Check Business Insider now. As soon as the meeting ended, Helen rushed to her computer. The headline of the country's leading financial news outlet made her blood run cold. Secret romance, Alistair Construction CEO and former assistant, caught in intimate moment. Accompanying the article, a grainy photo, clearly taken with a telephoto lens, showed Helen and Robert kissing on his apartment balcony. The text was a mix of malicious insinuations and pseudo-journalism, suggesting that Helen's rapid rise in the company was directly linked to personal favors rendered to the CEO. Internal sources reveal that Ms. Davies, a resident of one of New York City's largest low-income communities, quickly rose from junior assistant to an unprecedented position of power with direct access to the CEO and influence over strategic decisions. Helen felt her stomach churn. The article further cited anonymous sources who claimed she had deliberately orchestrated Melinda Ferris's dismissal, clearing the way for her own ascent. Her phone rang. It was Robert. I've seen it, he said before she could even speak. I'm calling a press conference in an hour. What? No. That will only make things worse. I won't allow them to assassinate your character like this, Helen. I won't allow them to turn something pure and true into a sordid scandal. The determination in his voice left no room for discussion. An hour later, the Alistair Construction Auditorium was packed with journalists and curious employees. Helen, sitting in the front row, felt exposed and vulnerable under the camera flashes and speculative gazes. Robert stepped onto the stage with the same confident demeanor as always, but Helen could see the tension in his shoulders, the determination in his jaw. I appreciate everyone's presence on such short notice, he began, his firm voice echoing through the microphone. I called this press conference to clarify the rumors and, most importantly, to make a personal statement. The silence was absolute as he continued. Yes, I am in a relationship with Helen Davies, and yes, she also works at this company. However, any insinuation that her professional competence is linked to our personal relationship is not only false, but deeply offensive. Robert then recounted in precise detail how he met Helen, omitting only the part about the resignation letter, and how her exceptional ability caught his attention long before any personal feelings arose. Ms. Davies led an investigation that revealed systematic, unethical practices within this organization, practices that I, as CEO, failed to identify for years. She risked her own career to stand up for what is right. This is the kind of integrity we value at Alistair Construction. Helen watched, dumbfounded, as he defended not only their relationship, but her professional honor with an eloquence that silenced even the most skeptical journalists. As for our personal relationship, Robert continued, his tone softening slightly, I ask for respect for our privacy. Yes, I come from a traditional family. Yes, Helen comes from humble beginnings. And that is absolutely irrelevant to what we feel for each other. His eyes met hers in the audience. Some of you will ask about conflict of interest, a legitimate concern. Therefore, I announce that, as of today, Helen Davies will report directly to the board of directors, not to me. All decisions related to her career will be made by an independent committee. The press conference continued for another 20 minutes, with Robert answering questions with a combination of professional firmness and personal frankness rarely seen in executives of his caliber. When it ended, Helen was quickly escorted out by security, avoiding the onslaught of reporters. In Robert's office, finally alone, she let her emotions overflow. "Why did you do that? We could have denied it, let the dust settle, and live hidden forever." He held her face between his hands. "Helen, I don't care what they think. I don't care about nervous shareholders or sensationalist headlines. I care about you, about us." The tears she had held back throughout the press conference finally escaped. "I don't know if I have the strength to face all of this." "Yes, you do." Robert kissed her softly. "The woman I met has enough strength to face the entire world if she needs to." That night, Helen called her mother before the news reached her through other means. Mrs. Celia listened in silence to the complete story, the accidental meeting, the months working together, the love that grew between them, the current scandal. "I know it sounds crazy, Mom," Helen concluded, nervous about the silence on the other end of the line. "I know you always warned me about the risks of trusting rich people." Mrs. Celia sighed deeply. "Daughter, I've spent my whole life cleaning up after the wealthy, overhearing conversations not meant for my ears, seeing how they treat people like us. I learned to distrust, to always expect the worst." Helen waited, her heart pounding, for the condemnation that would surely come. "But I also learned," her mother continued, surprising her, "that a person's character isn't in their bank account or their address. It's in their actions, and this man just publicly exposed himself to defend you. That says a lot." Mrs. Celia's words were a balm, but the days that followed tested Helen's resilience like never before. The tabloids had a field day, digging into her past, interviewing former schoolmates, neighbors in Southwood. Even a high school ex-boyfriend surfaced to tell his story. The press harassment was relentless. Reporters camped outside Helen's building, followed her on her commute to work, approached her mother and brother. Robert, accustomed to the spotlight since adolescence, tried to protect her as best he could, but the pressure was overwhelming. At the company, the situation wasn't much better. Although many colleagues showed support, Helen felt the stares, heard the whispers. "Slept her way to the top" was the phrase that hurt most, though she pretended not to care. A week after the scandal erupted, Helen was working late when an anonymous message arrived in her corporate email. The subject line simply read, "You don't belong here," and the content was a grotesque photo montage of her face on the bodies of women in pornographic poses. It was the last straw. When Robert found her, she was packing her belongings into a box. "What are you doing?" he asked, alarmed. "It's over, Robert. I can't do this anymore." Helen showed him the email, her hands trembling. "This is just the beginning. They'll destroy me. They'll destroy your reputation. They'll destroy everything you've built." Robert slammed the laptop shut. "We're going to the police right now. This is a crime." "And then what? Another email will come. Another scandal. Another attack." Helen sat down, exhausted. Maybe everyone is right. Maybe I don't belong in this world. And maybe I'm tired of this world. Robert knelt before her, holding her hands. "Helen, let's get out of here. Not forever. Just long enough for this storm to pass. Run away? No, retreat strategically." His eyes gleamed with determination. "I have a house on the coast, isolated, safe. We can work remotely for a few weeks. Let the next scandal take our place in the headlines." The idea was tempting. To escape the stares, the constant pressure, to have time to think, to breathe. But Helen hesitated. What if this is just the beginning? What if they never accept our relationship? Then we'll create our own path. Robert kissed her softly. "Please, don't give up on us. Not now." That night, Helen called her mother explaining the situation. Mrs. Celia, always practical, supported the decision. "Go, daughter, take care of your heart. I'll be here when you return." The next morning, as the city was still waking up, Helen and Robert discreetly headed for the northern coast of New York. The house, which Robert had modestly called a retreat, turned out to be an impressive property on Martha's Vineyard, with panoramic ocean views, isolated on a tip of the island, accessible only by boat or helicopter. The first few days were pure relief. Away from the stares, the cameras, the speculation, they could finally just be a man and a woman in love. They worked during the day, remotely connected to the company, and spent their evenings talking by the sea, truly getting to know each other, without the social masks they had grown accustomed to wearing. On one of those nights, sitting on the sand under an impressive starry sky, Robert asked the question he had been rehearsing for days, "Marry me." Helen turned to face him, unsure if she had heard correctly. His gaze left no doubt. It was intense, sincere, vulnerable. "Robert, don't answer now," he hastened to say. "In fact, don't answer until we return to New York City, until the storm has passed. I want you to be sure that your answer isn't influenced by this moment, by this place." He took a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside, a white gold ring with a single emerald, not ostentatiously large but of a deep, mesmerizing green. "It belonged to my grandmother, the only person in the family who married for love, not convenience." The gesture was so sincere, so far removed from the calculating corporate world they knew, that Helen felt tears in her eyes. "It's the strangest marriage proposal I've ever heard," she laughed, through tears. "Well, we are quite an unusual couple," Robert smiled, putting the ring back in his pocket. "Think about it. No rush." But the peace lasted less than they expected. 3 days later, a bombshell hit Alastair Construction. Leaked documents suggested that Robert had manipulated evidence to incriminate Melinda Ferris, all to protect Helen and justify her meteoric promotion. The source of the documents, none other than Melinda, apparently working behind the scenes for revenge since her departure. The documents were forged, of course, but the damage was done. The credibility of the entire process was compromised. The board convened an emergency meeting and demanded Robert's immediate return. "I'm not going without you," he insisted, as he hastily packed his bags. "I need to stay." Helen was pale, devastated by the turn of events. "If we go back together now, it will look like I'm hiding behind you. I need to face this on my own, prove my worth once again." "Helen, this is a trap. Melinda wants exactly that, to separate us, to attack us individually." "Perhaps, but if we don't do this the right way, she wins." Helen held his face between her hands. "Trust me, I'll be back in 2 days, with all the evidence organized, all the proof that the documents are fake. In the meantime, calm the board." Reluctantly, Robert agreed. Before leaving, he hugged her tightly. 2 days, no more. If you don't come back, I'll come for you personally." After his departure, Helen worked incessantly, reviewing documents, collecting evidence, preparing an irrefutable defense. On the morning of the second day, as she was about to leave the island, she received a call that would change everything. It was Robert, and his voice was unrecognizable, trembling, broken. Melinda was found dead in her apartment. Apparent suicide. Helen felt the world spin. My God, how? Overdose of medication. She left a letter. His voice faltered. A letter confessing that she forged the documents, that she was obsessed with revenge. "The police are investigating, but the letter seems authentic." That's horrible. Helen felt sick. She hated Melinda for what she had done, but she never wished her death. "How are you?" "In shock. The board is in crisis. The press is frantic. The shareholders are in a panic." He took a deep breath. "We need you here." Now, Helen closed her eyes, trying to process the avalanche of emotions. "I'll be there as soon as possible." The return to New York City was a blur of emotions and tension. Helen boarded the first available helicopter as a storm gathered on the horizon, a harbinger of the chaos awaiting her in the capital. Throughout the journey, her mind wavered between the shock of Melinda's death and the anxiety of what she would find upon arrival. Alastair Construction headquarters was besieged by reporters when Robert's car parked at the back of the building. Security guards formed a barrier to allow Helen to enter unmolested, but she could hear the journalists' shouts, the questions hurled like poisoned arrows. "Is it true you pressured Melinda to suicide? Was her death convenient to cover up the scandal? Did your relationship begin before or after she was promoted? Robert awaited her in the private elevator, his face marked by deep dark circles and a pallor she had never seen before. When the doors closed, he embraced her desperately, as if he feared she might disappear. "The situation is out of control," he murmured against her hair. "The police have already ruled out homicide, but the press is speculating that we are somehow responsible for her suicide. How can they suggest that?" Helen pulled back to face him, horrified. "Those people desperate for headlines don't care about the truth." His jaw was tense. "The board has been meeting since last night. Some members are calling for my temporary removal, for the good of the company." The elevator reached the executive floor. Helen could feel the tension in the air, employees whispering in groups, gazes that shifted away when she passed, the heavy silence that fell wherever they went. In the main boardroom, the full board of directors awaited them. 12 men and 2 women, all dressed in sober tones, all with grave expressions. Theodore Alistair, Robert's uncle and chairman of the board, a man in his 60s with grey hair and a stern gaze, stood up when they entered. "Robert, Helen?" His tone was cold. "Thank you for coming so promptly. We had no choice, apparently." Robert kept a firm hand on Helen's waist, a gesture of protection and defiance simultaneously. "The situation is delicate." Theodore motioned for them to sit. "Melinda's death, coupled with the previous accusations and your relationship, has created a perfect storm. Shares have fallen 12% since yesterday. Melinda falsified documents and tried to sabotage the company out of revenge," Robert replied, his voice controlled but tense. "Her suicide, however tragic, confirms her instability." "That's insensitive, Robert," Eliza Miller, the CFO, interjected. "A woman is dead." "And I deeply regret that," he replied, "but I will not take responsibility for a choice she made. No one in this room pressured her or drove her to that point." Helen observed the dynamic with growing apprehension. It was evident that lines had already been drawn before her arrival. The board was divided, but the majority seemed to have already made a decision. "The fact," Theodore continued, "is that we need to act decisively to contain the damage. After deliberation, the board has reached a recommendation." He slid a document across the table. "Your temporary removal, Robert, for 90 days, while an independent audit investigates all accusations, and Ms. Davies's dismissal, with generous severance, of course." Helen felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. Beside her, Robert remained absolutely motionless for a few seconds, then laughed, a dry, humorless laugh. "Fire Helen and remove the CEO on the same day. Don't you think that would be admitting guilt in the eyes of the public?" "It would be seen as corporate prudence," Theodore countered, "a demonstration that we take governance seriously." "And a demonstration of moral cowardice." Robert stood up. "Helen is not only innocent of any wrongdoing, but was the person who exposed the toxic environment Melinda had created. Firing her now, when she needs our support most, would be not only unfair but deeply cruel." The silence that followed was dense, charged with tension. Helen realized it was time to speak. "With all due respect," she began, keeping her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands, "I understand the board's concern for the company's image, but punishing victims to appease public opinion is a dangerous path. If you fire me today, you validate all the false accusations. You turn a personal tragedy into proof of corporate guilt." She opened her folder and distributed some documents. "These are all the pieces of evidence of Melinda's document forgery, technical reports, forensic email analyses, witness testimonies. I didn't flee to Martha's Vineyard to hide. I went to compile evidence, to build our defense." The room fell silent as the board members examined the documents. Helen continued, gaining confidence. "As for my relationship with Robert, yes, it began after I started working directly with him. Yes, it crosses professional lines that should normally be respected, but it never influenced corporate decisions or compromised the integrity of either of us." She looked directly at Theodore. "If the board decides to fire me today, tomorrow it will face a lawsuit for discrimination and retaliation, because there is no legal basis for it, and everyone in this room knows it." The threat hung in the air, clear but not explicitly declared. Robert watched Helen with a mixture of surprise and admiration, She had grown so much since the insecure young woman who had mistakenly entered his office months ago. Theodore cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. It's not about discrimination, Miss Davies. It's about public perception and shareholder confidence. And how exactly will firing the only person who had the courage to confront a toxic environment improve public perception? Helen leaned forward. You have a unique opportunity here. You can be remembered as the board that bowed to fear and prejudice, or as the board that championed justice and integrity even under extreme pressure. The room fell silent again. Robert resumed speaking, his voice calm but charged with determination. Let's make one thing clear, he said, looking at each board member. If Helen leaves this company today, I leave with her, not as a temporarily removed CEO, but as a former CEO, selling all my shares immediately. Imagine what that will do to the market value. The threat was real, and everyone knew it. Robert held 32% of the construction company's shares. A massive sale would instantly plummet the stock's value, not to mention the panic it would generate in the market. This is blackmail, Robert, Eliza, the CFO, observed, but her tone carried no real condemnation. This is loyalty, he corrected, something that seems scarce in this room today. After what felt like an eternity, Theodore sighed deeply. We will reevaluate our position. In the meantime, I suggest you both take a voluntary 2-week leave, with full pay. It will give time for things to calm down and for us to review all the documentation presented. It was a concession, not a complete victory, but Helen and Robert knew it was the best they could get at that moment. They accepted the terms and left the boardroom with their heads held high, ignoring the speculative glances that followed them. In the elevator, alone again, Robert finally let the mask of the unshakable CEO fall. He leaned his forehead against the mirrored wall and closed his eyes. I'm so sorry for all of this, he murmured. I never wanted you to go through this kind of scrutiny and judgment. Helen gently touched his face. I chose to be here, remember. No one forced me. He opened his eyes, and she saw something she had never noticed before. Fear, not for the corporate empire he might lose, not for his tarnished reputation, but for her. For them. What if we're making a mistake? He asked, almost in a whisper. What if this destroys everything you've built, everything you've worked for? What if it's the best mistake I've ever made? Helen smiled slightly. Robert, I've spent my entire life being prudent, doing what was expected, fearing to lose the little I had achieved. For the first time, I'm risking everything for something that truly matters. The elevator reached the ground floor. Before the doors opened, Robert kissed her, a desperate kiss, as if trying to communicate everything he couldn't express in words. When they separated, both knew a decision had been made. They wouldn't run, they wouldn't hide. They would face whatever came, together. The 2 weeks of forced leave were, paradoxically, a gift, away from the public eye, staying in a discreet house in rural New York that few knew belonged to Robert. They finally had time to truly consider their future. They spent their days walking wooded trails, talking about dreams they had never shared with anyone, planning a life together that seemed simultaneously impossible and inevitable. Helen spoke about her desire to create a foundation for young people from underserved communities interested in communications and marketing. Robert confessed his weariness with the corporate world, his secret desire to focus on genuinely transformative social housing projects. At night, under a starry sky so different from New York City's, they made love with an intensity that grew each day, as if every touch could solidify their connection, making it invulnerable to external pressures. It was during one of those nights, wrapped in tangled sheets, that Helen finally gave her answer. Yes, she said simply, tracing the outline of his face with her fingers. Robert frowned, confused. Yes to what? Yes, I'll marry you. She smiled as she saw understanding transform his face. I assume the proposal is still on the table. In response, Robert jumped out of bed and rushed to his suitcase. He returned with the small velvet box he had shown her on Martha's Vineyard. From the moment we met, he said, kneeling beside the bed with a solemnity that comically contrasted with his nudity, you turned my world upside down. You questioned my certainties, challenged my limited vision, made me see beyond the walls I had built around myself. He opened the box, revealing the emerald ring. Helen Davies, Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, of building a life by my side? Regardless of the challenges we face, with tears in her eyes, Helen extended her left hand. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The ring slipped perfectly onto her finger, as if it had always been meant to be there. In that moment, all doubts, all fears, all uncertainties seemed insignificant. They had found something rare, a love that not only survived storms but grew stronger through them. The return to New York City, 2 weeks later, was different from what they expected. To their surprise, the board had done an impressive job of damage control. An independent investigation had confirmed the authenticity of Melinda's suicide letter and the forgery of the documents. A carefully orchestrated press conference had presented Helen as an exemplary professional who had helped expose unethical practices. And, even more surprisingly, the love story between the powerful CEO and the young woman from humble origins had captured the public's imagination, transforming the scandal into an almost romantic narrative. "Can people love a modern Cinderella story?" explained Mariana, the new head of communications, in their first meeting. "We're receiving more messages of support than criticism now." Helen didn't know whether to laugh or be indignant at that characterization. She decided to do what she always did, focus on her work and ignore the external noise. In the following weeks, she implemented a series of changes to the Ethics Committee, establishing anonymous reporting channels, diversity and inclusion workshops, and a complete review of promotion and evaluation policies. Robert, for his part, announced an ambitious housing project in Southwood, not a luxury condominium on the outskirts of the community, but dignified and affordable housing for local families, developed with active participation from residents. The project award, which initially generated skepticism, soon became the pride of Alastair Construction. Robert, who previously rarely left the office, now spent entire days in the community, talking with local leaders, listening to needs, adjusting blueprints and budgets. Helen accompanied him whenever possible, serving as a bridge between the two worlds that now intertwined in her life. Mrs. Celia, initially reserved with Robert, gradually lowered her defenses upon seeing the genuine respect with which he treated not only Helen, but everyone around him. When he formally asked for her blessing for their marriage, at a simple dinner in the small kitchen of the apartment in Southwood, the matriarch finally smiled. "You proved me wrong, my son," she said, holding his hands between her own, calloused by decades of work. Some rich people do have a heart, after all. The wedding, held 6 months after the tumultuous period that almost destroyed their lives, was a celebration no one present would ever forget. Not for its luxury, although the ceremony in the small historic chapel in downtown New York City and the reception in the gardens of a restored colonial house were undeniably elegant. What made that event extraordinary was the improbable mix of worlds. Executives in expensive suits chatting animatedly with neighbors from Southwood, young people from social projects dancing alongside socialites, Mrs. Celia being revered as the mother of the bride by everyone, regardless of social status. Helen, in a simple but impeccably cut silk dress, seemed to radiate her own light as she walked down the aisle. Robert, waiting for her with barely contained tears, seemed unable to believe his own good fortune. When they exchanged vows, simple, honest words, without embellishment, there wasn't a dry eye in the chapel. "I promise to honor not just you," Robert said, his voice trembling slightly, "but everything you represent, your strength, your integrity, your ability to see beyond appearances. I promise to build a life by your side that lives up to the love we found in each other." Helen, with the emerald ring now accompanied by a gold wedding band, responded with equal emotion. "I promise never to let you forget who you truly are. Not the CEO, not the heir, but the man I found looking out the window that day, searching for something beyond the horizon. I promise to be your partner, your accomplice, your safe harbor." The party that followed lasted until dawn, a celebration not just of a wedding, but of broken barriers, connected worlds, of possibilities that once seemed impossible. Their honeymoon, 3 weeks in Italy, exploring small coastal villages far from the tourist circuit, was a dive into serenity after months of turbulence. They walked hand in hand on deserted beaches, drank wine on terraces overlooking the Atlantic, made love in simple rooms of family-run guest houses where no one knew their names or their story. It was during this period of peace that Robert shared a decision he had been contemplating for months. "I'm thinking of stepping down from the presidency of the construction company," he said one evening, as they watched the sunset on a small beach south of the Amalfi Coast. Helen turned to face him, surprised. "Are you sure the company is your life?" "It was." He smiled, intertwining his fingers with hers. "Now you are my life, and I realize more and more that I want to create something new, something that reflects who we've become together." He explained his plan, to continue as chairman of the board, but to appoint a new CEO for daily operations. Meanwhile, he would create a foundation focused on social housing and community development, working side by side with Helen, who had already expressed interest in leaving her position to dedicate herself to social projects. "We could truly make a difference," he concluded, his eyes shining with genuine enthusiasm. "Not just build buildings, but rebuild communities. Not just create campaigns, but transform narratives." Helen felt a wave of love so intense it almost took her breath away. This man, who one day represented everything she questioned about the system, had become her most unlikely partner in the mission to change it. "I think we've just found our shared purpose," she replied, kissing him softly. Their return to the United States brought not only renewed plans, but an unexpected surprise. What Helen initially attributed to jet lag and travel fatigue turned out to be something far more significant. A home pregnancy test, followed by a doctor's appointment, confirmed it. She was almost 2 months pregnant. The news caught both of them by surprise. They had talked about children, as of course, but as a possibility for the future, not for the immediate present. However, after the initial shock, a deep joy took hold of them. Robert, always controlled in public, openly wept when he heard the baby's heartbeat for the first time at the doctor's office. Helen, watching him marvel at that rapid, steady sound, felt that the circle was somehow closing, from the loneliness they both carried when they met, to the family unit they were now creating together. The pregnancy brought accelerated changes. Professional restructuring plans gained urgency. Robert officially announced his stepping down from the executive presidency, assuming the chairmanship of the board. Helen left her position at the company to dedicate herself to the newly created New Paths Foundation, which combined the housing projects Robert so desired to develop with educational and professional integration programs she had dreamed of implementing. In the months that followed, as Helen's belly grew and the foundation took shape, they bought and renovated a house in Brooklyn Heights, neither in the high luxury of the Upper East Side nor the periphery of Southwood, but a middle ground that symbolized the bridge they had built between their worlds. Mrs. Celia, now retired at her son-in-law's insistence, moved to a smaller house a few blocks away, close enough to be present, far enough to give the young couple privacy. Helen's brother, graduating with distinction, was hired as a junior engineer at the construction company, not through nepotism. Robert made sure to clarify, but by proven merit during his internship. It was in this new house, on a sunny Sunday afternoon, that Helen went into labor 2 weeks before her due date. Robert, who had become almost obsessively prepared, immediately activated the meticulously rehearsed plan. Bags in the car, fastest route to the hospital, notifications to family and doctors. 16 hours later, exhausted but radiant, Helen held her daughter in her arms, Sophia Davies Alistair, 7 pounds of pure perfection, with dark hair like her father's and expressive eyes like her mother's. Robert, observing the 2 women in his life at that first encounter, felt simultaneously stronger and more vulnerable than he had ever been. The girl who had once mistakenly entered his office with a resignation letter had transformed not only the company, not only his worldview, but his very heart. "She has your eyes," he murmured, sitting on the edge of the hospital bed. "And your stubborn chin," Helen smiled, gently running a finger over the newborn's cheek. "Yeah, I hope she has the best of both of us, and none of the worst," Robert completed, leaning in to kiss his daughter's forehead and then his wife's lips. "She already has the most important thing. She will be raised with love, respect, and the awareness that she comes from 2 worlds that together can create something extraordinary." That night, as little Sophia finally fell asleep in the bassinet beside the hospital bed, Robert and Helen remained awake, hands intertwined, reflecting on the improbable journey that had brought them there. From the resignation letter to the CEO's office, from animosity to passion, from distrust to the deepest love, from separate worlds to the united family they now formed. "Who would have thought," Helen whispered, caressing the wedding band on Robert's finger, "that my greatest act of rebellion would be delivering a resignation letter to the wrong person?" Robert smiled, kissing her hand. "And who would have thought that my greatest success would be tearing up that letter?" Outside the hospital window, New York City continued its frantic rhythm: lights, honking, skyscrapers, low-income communities. The same city of contrasts and contradictions where their story had begun. But inside that room, in the bubble of serenity they had created, the contrasts did not divide. They complemented. In a world that insisted on separating, categorizing, hierarchizing, they had built a bridge. And now, looking at their peacefully sleeping daughter, they knew that this bridge was not just for them. It was a path to the future, a legacy that transcended fortunes, companies, or social status. "I think I finally understand what truly building something lasting means," Robert murmured, watching the gentle rise and fall of his daughter's chest. Helen squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "And we're just getting started."